The silence in the courtroom was heavier than I'd ever imagined, a palpable thing that pressed in on my eardrums, a physical weight that seemed to steal the very air from my lungs. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of unspoken words, of finality hanging in the oppressive atmosphere like a thick fog. My parents sat across from me, their backs a rigid wall, their faces turned away, etched with a grim finality that I'd only glimpsed in stolen moments before, fleeting expressions that I had desperately tried to ignore or rationalize away. Now it was laid bare, stark and unyielding. They had made their choice, a swift, almost surgical severing of ties, an absolute repudiation of me that felt both deeply personal and disturbingly impersonal, like a piece of outdated inventory being discarded. And in that moment, as the judge droned on about legal technicalities that felt utterly hollow, a procession of jargon and procedure that bore no resemblance to the raw human pain unfolding, I knew they had miscalculated. They thought they were ending me, extinguishing some inconvenient spark, when in fact they were simply giving me the space I needed to truly ignite. It had started subtly, as these things often do, a slow erosion rather than a sudden cataclysm. A growing distance, initially explained away by busy schedules and divergent lives, then a series of thinly veiled criticisms, delivered with an almost artful precision, that chipped away at my confidence, leaving behind hairline fractures in my self-esteem. Then came the overt disapproval, a palpable shift in their demeanor, the judgment passed on my choices, my friends, my very way of being. They saw me as a disappointment, a deviation from the perfect, unblemished mold they'd envisioned for me, a deviation that threatened the pristine perfection of their own carefully constructed lives. I tried to bridge the widening chasm to show them I was capable, that my path, though different from the one they'd charted, was still valid, still filled with its own unique light and potential. But their minds were made up, their judgment passed, and their convictions as unshakable as bedrock. The final straw was an ultimatum, a demand delivered with a chilling lack of emotion, a categorical imperative that I conform or face the consequences. When I couldn't, when I refused to abandon who I was, the core of my being, for the hollow echo of their approval, they initiated the proceedings. Court disownment. It sounded dramatic, almost theatrical, a phrase that belonged more in a Gothic novel than a modern courtroom, but the reality was a cold, sterile legal document that declared me an outsider, an anomaly to be removed from their carefully managed equation. They didn't want to be associated with me, not publicly, not privately, their reputation a far more precious commodity than familial connection. The days immediately following the court date were a blur of disbelief, a surreal landscape where the familiar contours of my life had been suddenly and violently reshaped. Yet beneath the shock a strange, unyielding calm began to settle, a quietude that felt both alien and profoundly grounding. My phone remained stubbornly silent, a black mirror reflecting only my own concerned face. My emails, once a constant stream of notifications, went unanswered, each unread message a tiny testament to my newfound isolation. The familiar family group chats, once buzzing with mundane exchanges and occasional laughter, were now ghost towns, their digital silence echoing the physical void left by my parents. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world, a phantom limb amputated from their familial body. The initial sting of rejection was sharp, a visceral ache in my chest, a phantom pain where love and belonging once resided. But beneath it, something else was stirring, something resilient and tenacious. A quiet resolve, a flicker of determination that refused to be extinguished. I had spent years trying to be what they wanted, molding myself into a shape that never quite fit, contorting my true self to meet their expectations. I had swallowed my own voice, muted my own opinions, carefully curated my own desires, all in the hope of earning their love and acceptance, a currency I now realized was devalued by its very conditionality. It was a futile endeavor, a Sisyphean task I had unknowingly undertaken. Their love, it seemed, was conditional, a fragile bloom that withered under the slightest deviation from their predefined parameters, and I had failed their impossibly high test. I remembered a conversation from years ago, a seemingly casual remark my mother had made about her sister, my Aunt Carol. They hadn't spoken in decades, a bitter feud that had started over something trivial, a disagreement so insignificant in retrospect that its festering and growth into an unbreachable chasm seemed almost absurd. My mother would often lament this estrangement, a perfor made of sadness that always struck me as hollow, given her own unforgiving nature, her unwavering conviction that she was always in the right. She would speak of her sister's stubbornness, her difficult personality, framing herself as the sole victim of Carol's perceived transgressions. But there was a persistent undertone to her lamentations, A hint of something she held back. A carefully guarded secret about the real reason for the fallout. A truth buried so deep it was almost inaccessible. It was a story that had always fascinated me. A mystery whispered in hushed tones during rare family gatherings when Carol's name was accidentally brought up. A forbidden topic that always seemed to cast a pall over the otherwise carefully constructed cheerfulness. My parents prided themselves on their impeccable reputation, their carefully curated image of success and respectability, a public persona they had meticulously cultivated over decades. They were pillars of their community, their lives an open book of achievements and good deeds, or so they presented to the world. I, on the other hand, was always the outlier, the one who didn't quite fit the pristine family narrative, the discordant note in their harmonious symphony. They treated me with a condescending patience, a subtle but ever-present air of superiority, as if I were a perpetually misguided child who would eventually see the light, their light. Their judgment was constant, unspoken but ever-present, a silent disapproval that permeated every interaction. Now they had taken their judgment to the ultimate extreme, using the cold, impersonal machinery of the legal system to erase me, to expunge me from their lives and their history. The secret I held wasn't a grand conspiracy or a hidden fortune, no sensational scandal that would shake the foundations of their carefully constructed world. It was far more personal, far more deeply rooted in the fabric of their lives, a quiet betrayal that had festered in the shadows. It was about something my mother had done, an action, a decision, that had profoundly impacted her relationship with her own sister, and something she had meticulously buried beneath layers of denial and deflection, a masterful act of self-deception and external manipulation. It was a truth that, if exposed, would not dismantle their world in a cataclysmic, explosive way, but would certainly crack the polished veneer they had worked so hard to maintain, revealing the imperfections beneath. It was about a promise broken, a trust betrayed, and the quiet, insidious theft of an opportunity that had irrevocably altered the course of my Aunt Carol's life, a life lived in the shadow of that stolen chance. I spent weeks poring over old documents, sifting through forgotten boxes in the dusty, cobweb-laden attic, piecing together fragments of conversations, half-truths and silences that spoke louder than any words. My parents, in their haste to disown me, in their eagerness to purge me from their lives, had overlooked a crucial detail. They had also inadvertently handed me the keys to their past, the very archive of their secrets. The silence they imposed on me, the isolation they orchestrated, had, ironically, amplified my ability to listen, to attune myself to the whispers of history, the echoes of forgotten injustices. I found old letters, their ink faded but their sentiments sharp, financial statements that told a story of ambition and sacrifice, and a surprisingly detailed diary belonging to my Aunt Carol, carefully preserved by my grandmother, who had always been more sentimental, more inclined to hold on to memories, than my pragmatically inclined parents. These weren't evidence of criminal activity, no smoking gun that would lead to handcuffs and prison cells. Rather, they were a testament to a deeply personal betrayal, a mosaic of hurt and disappointment meticulously documented. The turning point arrived not with a sudden flash of anger, not with an explosive outburst of righteous fury, but with a cold, clear understanding that settled over me like a shroud. My parents were not just rejecting me, they were actively rewriting my history, attempting to erase my presence from their narrative to preserve their own self-serving story of perfection. They had disowned me because I was inconvenient, because I didn't fit their idealized vision of family, a vision that seemed to prioritize image over substance, appearance over authenticity. And in doing so, they had inadvertently opened the door for the truth about their imperfections, their own flaws, to surface. The court had granted them their wish to be free of me, to sever the ties that bound us. Now I had the opportunity to ensure they couldn't escape the consequences of their own actions, not entirely, not in the quiet, insidious way that truly mattered, the way that impacted their most prized possession, their reputation. I didn't confront them directly. There was no dramatic showdown, no tearful accusations hurled across a drawing room. That was their style, their playbook. Instead, I chose a more subtle, a more targeted approach, a strategy that mirrored the quiet precision of their own disownment. I compiled the information I had gathered, a clear and concise account of my mother's actions towards her sister, the broken promise, the stolen opportunity. I focused on the emotional fallout, the years of estrangement, the profound and lasting impact of her broken promise and her subsequent denial. I didn't embellish, didn't exaggerate, didn't resort to hyperbole. I simply presented the facts as my Aunt Carol had documented them, her pain and her perspective laid bare, corroborated by my mother's own admissions in her private writings, her own hidden confessions. Then I sent this meticulously prepared dossier, this quiet testament to a hidden truth, not to my parents, but to a select group of people within their social circle. Not everyone, but enough. The influential ones, the ones whose opinions carried weight, the ones who respected my Aunt Carol, the ones who had always found my parents' self-righteousness a little too much, a little too performative. I also sent a copy very carefully, very discreetly, to my Aunt Carol herself, a balm for a wound that had festered for decades. The fallout was not immediate, not an explosive headline-grabbing event. It was a slow burn, a creeping unease that permeated their social landscape. I began to notice subtle shifts in their carefully constructed world. My parents' usual circle of friends, those who had always been so warm and welcoming, so eager to bask in their reflected glory, started to keep their distance, their smiles a little tighter, their conversations a little more guarded. Invitations to their regular gatherings, once a staple of their social calendar, became less frequent, then ceased altogether. Conversations at the local club, where gossip and social maneuvering were the primary currency, seemed to grow hushed when my parents approached, a collective intake of breath that signaled a shift in the social dynamic. It was the kind of social refrigeration that is almost imperceptible at first, a subtle chill that barely registers, but devastating in its cumulative effect. People didn't make accusations, they simply withdrew, their social capital wisely invested elsewhere. A knowing glance here, a polite but firm refusal of an invitation there. My parents, who lived and breathed their social standing, their reputation their most prized possession, began to feel the chill, the growing isolation. Then came the whispers, the carefully veiled questions, delivered with an almost innocent curiosity that masked a deeper, more invasive interest. Is it true about your sister? We always wondered what happened there, you know? My mother, accustomed to her own carefully constructed narrative, to the unchallenged authority of her version of events, found herself unable to control the story, unable to steer the conversation back to her preferred script. Her attempts to deflect, to subtly blame her sister, to paint herself once again as the wronged party fell flat. The documented evidence, the personal confessions were too clear, too undeniable, too intimate. The carefully constructed image of the innocent victim began to crumble, replaced by an unsettling image of a woman who had caused significant pain and then systematically covered it up, a master of deception. I saw them at a rare public event, a charity gala they couldn't reasonably avoid without drawing more attention. They looked smaller. Their shoulders seemed to have slumped, their usual air of confident authority diminished. Their smiles seemed strained, tight-lipped and artificial, their conversations forced and lacking genuine connection. They were surrounded by people, a sea of familiar faces, but there was an aura of isolation about them, a palpable disconnect. They caught my eye across the room, a fleeting, almost accidental meeting of gazes. And for the first time I saw something akin to recognition flicker in my father's eyes, a brief moment of something that might have been regret, or perhaps just the dawning realization that their victory was not as absolute as they had believed, that their erasure of me had not been as complete as they had intended. They had disowned me, severed ties, and in doing so, had inadvertently shown the world that their judgment of me, their supposed insight into my character, was perhaps not the only thing that was flawed. They had expected me to disappear, to fade into obscurity, a ghost haunting the edges of their perfect lives. Instead, I had simply refused to let them forget a part of themselves they desperately wanted to keep hidden, a part that their own actions had inadvertently brought to light. The truth, it turned out, was a far more patient and persistent form of justice than any courtroom decree, a quiet power that, once unleashed, could not be easily contained.